Today we are going to be talking about living in Ontario versus living in British Columbia, which might be a bit of a tricky task because they are both massive provinces.
I feel like a lot of people who haven't traveled to Canada before or moved to Canada yet don't really understand, well, sometimes don't really understand just how big it is. So for reference, in landmass, the province of Ontario is approximately 3 times the size of Japan, 3.6 times the size of Italy, and 10 times the size of Iceland. British Columbia, or BC, is a little bit smaller. It's 2.5 times the size of Japan, 92% larger than Spain, and 86 times larger than Jamaica. So needless to say, the culture between Northern Ontario and Southern Ontario in itself, or even in BC, like Vancouver is going to feel very different than Port Alberni, than Prince George. So the cultures vary within their own provinces. So maybe it's a bit of an insult to try to categorize these provinces as a whole and compare them to each other, but you know, f it, we're gonna try.
A better question would be, what is life like in Vancouver versus Toronto? Which we will definitely mostly answer in this video as we've lived in both. But we'll try to include as many cities, small towns, cottage countries, remote communities, and small islands as we can.
I'm from Grand Bend, Ontario. I spent the first few years of my life there and then grew up mostly in Burlington, Ontario. I moved to Vancouver, BC when I was 14 years old, and I went to high school and graduated from high school there. And then I moved back to Ontario, to Oakville, Ontario for college. Graduated college, lived in Toronto, and then from Toronto I moved to Vancouver again as like now a young adult in my 20s and kind of jump-started my career there and met Nick, and then we lived in all sorts of places that are not in Canada. And then when we moved back to Canada, we went up to Lumby, BC, which is in the Okanagan, and then to Cambridge, Ontario, which is like in the Kitchener-Waterloo area of Ontario, and then now we're living in Kelowna, BC. So yeah, I've definitely been back and forth from Vancouver, well, from BC to Ontario my entire life.
I've definitely jumped around a lot as well.
Yeah.
I grew up in Abbotsford, BC. When I was about 12, I believe, I moved to Chilliwack, BC. So it's all within the Fraser Valley, just small towns, small rural kind of communities outside of the city. When I was 21, I believe, I moved to Vancouver. We came back, as she mentioned. We were in Lumby, then Cambridge, and now Kelowna.
Okay, so let's get started and talk about the province of Ontario, which is home to Canada's capital city, which is Ottawa, and also Canada's largest city, which is Toronto. That said, Ontario is definitely the center of business in Canada, and like we said, it's huge. There are 48 airports in Ontario, and the province is over 1 million square kilometers, and it has about 14.57 million people living in it. So if you're from a more densely populated country, that might not sound like a lot to you, but this sounds like a lot in comparison to BC.
And like most of Canada for that matter, it's a massive country and everything is so spaced out. In comparison, the province of BC has under half of that, with just over 5 million people. British Columbia's capital city is Victoria, BC, and its largest city is Vancouver, BC, which only has about 675,000 people living within the city itself. So much, much smaller by comparison. The difference is important to mention because the population density when you're living within those two cities is extremely noticeable. BC feels much more open and like you just have more room to breathe, kind of. There's just a lot more room to move around. Coming from someone who grew up in BC and then moving to Ontario with Rachel, it was a little bit jarring almost. To be in Canada and be within a city that's that densely populated. It feels like a lot. It's weird.
Or even just like being stuck in traffic there or whatever. Like it does feel a lot tighter than it does in BC, which I've had friends visit from Ontario before and really noticed that in BC as well. Like the other way around, it kind of feels like, oh, where are all the people?
While Vancouver may have the appearance of a big city, or even if you're in the city, it may kind of feel like that at times, it's really not. Toronto, on the other hand, is surrounded by these huge freeways that are always backed up with cars and traffic, and I've spent many hours
just sitting in that
just
traffic.
Sitting in the traffic, and
yeah.
I wasn't even there for that long. So
like, not to say Vancouver doesn't have traffic, but I feel like Vancouver's traffic is due to like poor city planning. Like there's just not enough
100%.
highway, whereas like Toronto is set up, I mean, the greater Toronto area is set up pretty well. There's tons of like massive freeways. Yeah, it's always funny driving into Toronto, like when you're driving across Canada and then you drive from Vancouver or like from BC to Toronto. And like once you get into that area, it's like, I remember the first time you experienced it, you were like, oh, whoa, like it's like now we're like in a big city.
There's big trucks everywhere, which I'm used to driving next to big trucks, but it's just like everywhere. They're passing you on both sides, or you know, you have to go, like it's craziness.
Fast.
And like
it's fast.
Yeah.
Like all of it just starts to feel really fast. It's very different. It's a very different feeling. Yeah, I feel like commuting in Ontario was a lot more stressful than it was commuting in BC. I used to commute from Oakville every day to go work in downtown Toronto, and that's a long commute, but it's something that a lot of people in Ontario do. They commute from the greater Toronto area into the city for the day. So if you too are living in the GTA and commuting to Toronto every day, you'll likely have access to the GO train, which is a service that runs basically through all of southern Ontario, which is really great, and I'm so grateful for the GO train. But commuting to work every day on the GO train is much more expensive than, say, living outside of Vancouver and commuting in every day to Vancouver on Vancouver's SkyTrain. For example, at the time of recording this video, going from Oakville to Toronto round trip is $19.40. Whereas to go from Surrey to Vancouver during peak hours is $3 one day, or it's $10.50 for a day pass, and then that you can also use on all forms of transit once you're actually like in the city. These are all if you're paying with cash or credit, so they do have a Presto card circumstance kind of thing there that's very similar to Vancouver's Compass card, which is like you just load up the card and you can use it on most transit systems, so that is great. But yeah, the price difference is huge. I mean, that's a really big difference considering Surrey to Vancouver and Oakville to Toronto are about the same distance. Also, the GO train is usually packed. Like, I've missed the GO train before, had to sit on the floor of the GO train before during like peak hours at rush hour trying to get to work, and that would make me late for work. I mean, I'm sure the SkyTrain gets super packed in the morning too. Honestly, I haven't had to commute from out of the city into the city, but I'm sure it's a nightmare as well. Like, that's just how cities are. But really, the price difference is huge, and I must say that the ride on the SkyTrain is much more beautiful than the GO train ride.
And honestly, I would attribute that to Vancouver being one of the most beautiful cities in the entire world, for sure. And as many people know, you're surrounded by mountains, and it's right on the very west coast of Canada, so you're also right at the Pacific Ocean. That beauty expands like all over BC. It's lined with mountains everywhere. There's a mountain range that goes right through it, which is a lot different than in Ontario, where it's relatively flat. I know my first time going to Ontario, not when we lived there, but we went on a trip, and it was quite jarring for me because it was second nature to me to look, and there's just mountains everywhere. So when I got to Ontario, and then it was very flat, I almost felt very like exposed. Like, it was a very odd feeling. I've never experienced that. So that was definitely a bit jarring for me. So if you come from somewhere that's very mountainous, it can be a bit jarring. Ontario can be a bit jarring.
Yeah, it's very flat. It is very flat. Especially when you're like just driving on the freeway. Like, if you're not used to that, because, you know, driving in BC, like, you're going up mountains and like going
long,
around,
winding roads
hills,
through mountain lakes on the side.
But there it's just like
that was also, because I had a job driving when I was there, and it was like, it was torture sometimes. It was just like 6 hours of just like straight down a flat road, and it was just like, oh man, like it could almost put you in a trance.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But that said, Ontario does have a different kind of beauty. Like, definitely in some pockets of Ontario, it can be so beautiful. So Ontario is home to 4 of 5 of the Great Lakes, and it really translates into the culture, especially during the summertime. Like, there's definitely that kind of lake vibe, kind of cottage culture in Ontario that we don't have as much of in BC. Most people who live in Ontario either know someone who has a cottage or their family has a cottage themselves. But yeah, it's a very common thing to have, or to know someone who has one, or to work with someone who has one. You'll definitely hear talk of like Aurelia, Muskoka, Thousand Islands, Sauble Beach, like Manitoulin Island, Tobermory, and beautiful places like that. And really, they are absolutely stunning, and I really can't wait until I can take you to Ontario during the summertime, and so that you'll be able to explore these lake places as well, because God, they are really gorgeous too.
I had one job where I was moving stuff out of a cottage, and it was like incredibly
Yeah, I think
beautiful.
that one was in Muskoka.
It was
Yeah,
Muskoka, yeah. And again, beauty is subjective, so you might find BC gorgeous. Other people may find Ontario gorgeous. So it's it's subjective.
I think it'd be pretty easy to find both gorgeous, but like
Yeah.
I think Vancouver's is definitely more like in your face because I mean you're just surrounded by mountains. Like that you can't really beat that, but at the same time,
And you're on the ocean as well, which most people I believe consider to be a huge
well,
plus.
you're on the ocean in some parts of BC. We're not on the ocean right now at all.
True, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Vancouver, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but like definitely the mountains are something that I think that a lot of people wouldn't be able to argue that
The
that is like
rainforests.
so gorgeous. But yeah, in Ontario sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging. But at the same time, like I think some people would also argue, okay, well it doesn't really matter. Like you're at work all day. Why do you need mountains when you're at work? Like I want the beauty on the weekend or for 3 weeks in the summer when I go with my family, right? So it all depends on preference. So that's why we do mention both.
Having a cottage on the lake in Ontario is ideal, but in BC, there are options for this. So some families, obviously who are very, very fortunate, may have cabins in Whistler or a place on the Sunshine Coast, or up here where we're at in Kelowna, there's a lake, and there are much smaller lakes littered throughout the interior of BC. But that being said, as I'd mentioned, BC is more expensive than Ontario in terms of real estate.
But of course, again, it depends what you're comparing. So if you're comparing living in Vancouver, BC, where the average price of a home is $1.6 million to say like a place in Ontario like Sudbury, where the average home is less than $300,000, that isn't fair. You have to really compare apples to apples here. So if you're comparing Vancouver specifically to anything, then you are gonna have to compare it to Toronto, where I know firsthand that the price of rent isn't actually really that different between the two. And in BC, there are cheaper places, but they're not going to be right in the city or right near the city. So, I mean, even Prince George, it's a lot cheaper to live there, or like Williams Lake, that is going to be more comparable to suburbs in Ontario. Hi, editing Rachel here. So I kind of just wanted to clear up what I was trying to say, because it sounds like I'm trying to kind of diminish the price of living in Vancouver, and I don't want to do that. Living in BC, especially Vancouver, is more expensive than living in Ontario. But at the same time, I just want to make it really clear that like just the same as a lot of people can't afford to live downtown Toronto, a lot of people can't afford to live in Vancouver. They're both major cities, and Vancouver is not only, the most expensive city in Canada, but one of the more expensive cities in the whole world. So it's not fair to compare like Sarnia, Ontario to Vancouver. So if you're comparing like a small northern town in Ontario, compare it to a small northern town in BC. And all I was trying to say is just as there is more to Ontario than just Toronto, there's more in BC than just Vancouver. So give the rest of BC a chance is all I'm saying when you're looking at prices, and don't be afraid of all of BC because of the prices in Vancouver.
If you're looking for more of an outdoorsy sort of culture, we definitely recommend picking BC, Vancouver, the Okanagan, the Lower Mainland, the Fraser Valley, Vancouver Island. All of these places are packed with a ton of hikes, and or near the ocean or by lakes or surrounded by mountains. So it's really, really outdoorsy here. There's a lot of outdoorsy culture. If you've watched other vlogs that we've done, we're constantly doing hikes, which I mean just goes to show, like there's a lot of that to do here.
And what people do, right? It's like the general culture here is more outdoorsy. Obviously you can't categorize a whole people by, like we said, there's millions of people in both provinces.
There's just more options for outdoorsy activities in BC than say in Ontario. But
yeah, it's fine.
I'm sure people would argue that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm from Ontario and I'm not offended, so you can't be offended. It is just different. There's more to do outside. There's mountains, there's ocean, there's more stuff to do outside, and it's mild basically, I mean, in a lot of parts of BC all year round. There are definitely places in BC that get cold in the winter and get snowy in the winter, that's for sure. The further north that you get up BC, it is going to be, like you said, more gnarly up there.
More north than anywhere is obviously going to get more gnarly.
Yeah.
That's just like standard geography, but
in a lot of places in BC, like you're not going to get -30 or even -20 degree winters in most places. Like we're here in Kelowna right now, it's winter, it's January. We are currently inside of our van filming this video, and it's 11 degrees in here.
It's 11 degrees in here. Outside, I think it's like 6
chillier.
degrees, maybe 7 degrees.
It's not too bad, and it's like the middle of January. The whole point being that the lower mainland, like around Vancouver and on Vancouver Island, it's a wet, mild winter.
It's very gray. It's very wet. It's still chilly. Like it's still, you know, like 0 degrees to like 4 degrees.
That's warm. Yeah.
It does. Well, I mean, when you're in it, it does feel kind of like the rain's pelting you, and it kind of sucks. And a lot of people, it's hard for a lot of people to deal with because it's so, it's just so gray. Whereas in Ontario, you get the blue skies, but it's like -25, like 4 or 5 feet of snow on the ground.
Cold, icy. It really depends on your preference. Like some people really don't mind the cold as long as it's bright and sunny. I know that for some people that gray weather, it really bothers them. And we you know, talked about it in our Vancouver video, and someone commented like, you guys didn't really accentuate how gray it is. And I was like, that's weird. But I sometimes forget that it really bothers some people. It personally doesn't bother me in the slightest.
See, this is where we're kind of the opposite. Like Rachel prefers that gray, mild winter, whereas when we went to Ontario, I was kind of stoked because I don't really mind super cold as long as it's blue skies and sun. I can put up with both, but I prefer like an Ontario winter.
Yeah.
I mean, once I put up with one,
and at first you said I prefer the gray. Like I would rather it be sunny and warm all year round, but like if you're gonna have to get something, I personally think that I would rather it just be mild. At least I can still go hiking in a light sweater and enjoy time outside. Whereas, oh my god, like when I was going to college in Ontario, I lived literally like directly behind the college. Like there was nothing, no road or houses between. Like I could just hop the fence and I'd be on the school's property. And that walk to school, like some days I just didn't even want to go because it was so cold. And it might be you're from BC and I'm from Ontario kind of thing. That is probably why.
Yeah. I have like 7-8 months out of the year that are gray, and I really value my sunshine. And then you're just like, it's cold.
Yeah, I would do anything to just like be warm.
Yeah. Warmer. As warm as you can be.
But the pro of Ontario too is that like you really get all 4 seasons. If you're coming from a place that only has 2 seasons, for example, like wet season and dry season, and you're really looking for that experience, you know, when you have autumn and all the leaves are orange, and then in winter everything's all white. Like Ontario really has that, and some places in BC have that as well, but not Vancouver. Vancouver doesn't really have that.
Vancouver's just kind of like a gray muck until it's like summer all of a sudden.
Vancouver also doesn't get that hot in the summer. In a lot of places in Ontario, you're gonna get like scorching hot summers, autumns with beautiful orange and yellow leaves, white Christmas, and then like a rainy spring. So you really do get 4 seasons there. And there are some places in BC that are like that, but there is a large area of BC, and the most popular area for people to go to in BC isn't like that. So it depends if you really want that.
Here we are going to do a little bit of a speed round of some of the most beautiful places in both BC and Ontario. Vancouver, Whistler, Tofino, Sun Peaks, Squamish, Salt Spring Island, Bowen Island, Radium Hot Springs, and Pemberton.
Ontario is home to Ottawa, Niagara Falls, Tobermory, Thousand Islands, Manitoulin Island, Prince Edward Country, Bruce Peninsula, and the Lake Superior Ice Caves. See, they're both beautiful. They really both are. There's so many beautiful places in both, but those were some fun ones. In addition, Toronto, this has been debated, but Toronto has been called the most multicultural city in the entire world. And you can definitely see it with your own eyes and like taste it with your own mouth when you're eating the food there. Like it is really obvious when you're there.
I thought that was the case when I was there. Like it seems like that would be the case. Maybe not the world, but it definitely seems more multicultural than most other places that I've lived.
Yeah,
for sure.
totally. It is super multicultural. It really is amazing. Over half of the population in Toronto is actually foreign born as well. I think at like 51%, which is pretty cool. And there are over 250 ethnicities and 170 languages that are represented in the Greater Toronto area. Vancouver has its diversity as well. But yeah, in Toronto, it is just, you can really feel the diversity. There are just so many different ethnicities, and it does really feel like the diversity is the pulse of the city.
And we do have to add this in. In Vancouver, you're going to get some incredible sushi at really low prices. And so if you're a Vancouverite like myself, moving to Ontario, you're not going to get as great of sushi for the same low price. It's not too bad, but it is a lot more expensive. And it's not nearly as good as it is in Vancouver.
It's just not the same.
No.
I'm sorry, it's just not the same. Like,
which is a huge con for us because
that's all we eat.
Well, we eat other stuff, but that's a lot of what we like whenever we go out.
When we were poor
when we do
in
go out, it's always
Vancouver,
sushi.
that's all we ate. It's just not the same. There are some great places, but really it's not the same.
We will also mention that the minimum wage between BC and Ontario differs only slightly. In Ontario, the minimum wage is set at $14 at the time of recording, and in BC, the minimum wage is set at $14.60 an hour.
It actually used to be like an even bigger difference. Like when I first moved to BC from Ontario, it was like a huge difference, and now they're pretty close. Both the wine country in Ontario and BC alike are both just beautiful, beautiful places, beautiful parts of the provinces. And yeah, so we're not even going to compare the wine in the wine countries. We're just going to say that they're both equally as beautiful.
We're not wine connoisseurs as much as we are sushi connoisseurs. We'll say that.
We're like sushi people, not wine people.
I mean, we are wine people, but I wouldn't say we're as much connoisseurs of fine wine as we are of fine
I'm thinking
sushi.
like if you want to go snap a cool Instagram picture and like get a little bit lit while doing it, you can do it in both provinces and it will be equally as amazing. So what province do we like more? We like BC more. Honestly, we both just like this province more. Mostly we like it more because of the smaller population. It feels more open. We love being surrounded by the mountains. We love when we're living down by the coast and we can be near the ocean, although we're not right now anyway. We love our cheap Vancouver sushi, and we love milder winters. And that's really where we're standing right now in our lives. No shade against Ontario. We love you too, Ontario, but right now BC is the place for us.
It also helps that the majority of our family also lives
our families live here too.
Out
Like
in BC.
we are kind of BC people now, but
yeah. Anyways, we hope that this gave you a general idea of the differences between the two provinces, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.
bye.